Kelli, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about what we're going to talk about.
We are that. We're going to dive into leadership. I think as you laughed off air, we should preface that we are not related, despite having the best last name ever right now of Thompson. In fact, we are just now connecting thanks to our mutual friend, Hannah Pryor, who gave you just amazing reviews as we were setting up today. And so I would love to kind of start maybe here, maybe not where you traditionally have started. Tell me where your passion for leadership really started to come from, because you have an interesting working career, I found, as I was following your journey. And I think a lot of us do, right? It's never that straight line that we expected. But somewhere along the way, there were seeds planted that you're like, I really want to help people lead better.
Yeah. So I would say I started my career in banking, actually, in financial services. And as one of my first jobs, I was selling credit card processing over the phone. And this was in the era where, believe it or not, like, I'm kind of old, people weren't actually taking credit cards. Gift cards weren't even a thing yet. Okay, so just let that blow your mind for a second. So I would have to make like 80 phone calls a day, calling people to see if they wanted to take credit cards. And it was the most horrible job ever, Jake. Just let me tell you. I mean, it taught me a lot. The skills are so great today. But where it actually started is I was pretty good at it. And so they would sit people with me and I would train them. And I'm like, I like this. I like coaching people. I like training people. And so then my next logical step actually was to move into sales training. And I think that's really where kind of that training and coaching component came from. That's really part of leadership. Yeah. So then I moved into a sales trainer role. Then I moved into an HR and then leadership development trainer role. And then I started to lead teams. And so then I was leading teams in banking. I was leading like the retail training team. So we'd have all the new bankers and tellers come in. And then I went to a healthcare tech company where I oversaw HR. And so again, I was, coaching and developing leadership development programs, but I was also leading my own team. But, one of the things that was really critical for me, though, was I grew up in financial services and honestly tech at a time where there just weren't women in leadership. Like, I couldn't look up and see people who looked like me in the rooms where decisions are made. And so I often thought to myself, like, gosh, do I have a future here? And why does it seem to be like opportunities for, advancing into leadership just feel so much harder than maybe my male counterparts? Lots of times I was the only woman in the room. And I guess I didn't realize how big of a part of loving leadership that would be until I went off on my own. I did work for a leadership development consulting firm for a little while, but when I did go off on my own, I kind of just did generic leadership training and coaching, kind of like, if you pay me money to work with me, I'll work with you and we'll work on leadership. Because again, I do have just this natural training, coaching bone in my body that I've had from early in my career. But when the pandemic hit and I lost like 80 to 90% of my business overnight, I really had to go in and ask myself, I'm like, well, if I'm literally working for free, what would I do for free? And I'm like, I went back to all those times when I was an HR person and women would come into my office and they would say, oh, Kelli, there's this job on the posting board and I'm so interested, but I only meet 9 of the 10 qualifications. And so they came in wondering if they should apply, lacking confidence, not even thinking about negotiating their salary. And I loved having those conversations. Men just approached it differently. They would email me and be like, who do I got to talk to? This job looks awesome. And that during COVID, when I really changed and started talking to women, and especially about women advancing in leadership, that's where everything started to connect. It was the love of coaching and the love of training, and then like just having that unique lens in really helping women advance to more rooms where decisions were being made. And, my business just kind of took off from there.
I love it. Well, as we laughed off air, one of the nuggets you talked about COVID being a big pivotal point, we realized we were speaking at the exact same venue on back-to-back days as our last talk before COVID hit right there in Omaha. The other thing that I would say really stood out about what you said, so one of the probably the more impactful books I've read that I love from a work standpoint, sociology, is called Top Dog. It's The Science of Winning and Losing. It's by Ashley Merriman and Poe Bronson. And Ashley's been on this podcast 7 years ago, maybe. But they very specifically look at how men and women enter competitive venues, because they talk about politics, for example, and doesn't matter what side of the aisle you sit on, women are more likely to win, but less likely to run. And they were like, what does this happen? And what they found in a lot of cases is to what your point was with the HR. guys don't care about the odds. I got 2 of 10 qualifications. Job looks cool. Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to build a relationship with? Whereas to your point, the woman come in the office, well, I only have 9 of 10. Like, I don't fit every single perfect. I don't think I'm going to put in for it. And they talked about that in the competitive sense, where women are very much more cautious and careful, where men are like, I got 10%, I'm throwing it out there. As arrogant and foolish as that is, but it impacts how we show up in a lot of sense. And so now, as you're telling that story, I'm really seeing the threads of your book, because I knew your book was really on closing the confidence gap, right? And confidence is something we talk about here on the show a lot of, to build confidence, you kind of got to do hard things sometimes, and you got to reflect back on those things. And you've done it very specifically for women in your shoes that probably you had the same feelings of inside. Talk to me about, like, everybody says I should write a book. Everybody says I want to write a book. We have these conversations as an author, like everybody's like, oh, I want to write a book. Most people don't do it. Like, what was the impetus to say, I really need to put something else on paper beyond just the coaching I'm doing, beyond just kind of the training, but I need to formalize and put this into a book? What was that kind of motivation? Because I'm always intrigued of what pushes someone, I would say, over the edge.
Yeah. And first I want to comment, because my book, Closing the Confidence Gap, was titled Closing the Confidence Gap before I realized that there was a study out of Wharton called The Confidence Gap. And it also echoes exactly what you just said. They wanted to understand why men just seemed to have an easier time than women advocating for themselves. And so, very briefly, because this all ties into why I got the impetus to write the book.
Let's dive down holes. Let's go.
Yeah. And so what they did was they gave a group of men and women a standardized test, and they did not tell them how they did on the test. This is key. But based on how you think you did on the test, you need to go and advocate to these hypothetical employers that are ready to hire you. And so I think we can all guess who did a better job advocating for themselves.
The men. But they did way worse on the test, I bet.
Who did a little better on the test. Women did a little better on the test. Yeah. And so what the Wharton researchers said was, well, maybe if we just start telling women to be more confident, then their confidence will follow suit. And so my book, the impetus for this, actually argues that. It says, no, it's not just enough to tell women, hey, you did better on the test, you're smarter, so therefore, you should be more confident. Because that's what they wanted to say. Just, hey, let's just tell women they did better, and then their confidence will follow suit. And I said, actually, that's not going to cut it. Because to really build sustainable confidence, we need to see more women in the rooms where decisions are made. The political environment is a beautiful arena for this right now. Like, women can't look up and say, hey, I've seen 5 other women, look like me, and so I think I'll just go for it. I think that's what it looks like. No, it's like women are held to a higher standard, and there's been so many studies that are done with this, is that, like, a man can run, and they won't overanalyze his qualifications. They'll look at his confidence. A woman would run, we're going to overanalyze her qualifications, poke holes, and if she comes off a little too overconfident, we're going to penalize her, but we won't do that to the man. So the impetus of writing a book really was, I've been a book nerd since I was a kid. I wanted to write a book since I was a kid, and I just never knew what I was going to write about. And it really wasn't until 2020, 2021, where I really got sick of my own BS of not writing a book. And it kind of just occurred to me, is like, wait a minute, this is what I'm talking about all of the time. Like, because I knew what it felt like to be one of the onlys in corporate America, when I got out of corporate America, my eyes were just opened into so many ways I could solve that problem. And so I started customized training programs for women in corporate on all the things I wished we would have talked about in corporate. And this is not just, hey, you need to speak up. Here's a framework to speak up. Here's a framework to have more confidence. What I also wanted to talk about was all the systemic issues that women are working against in corporate America, like the gender pay gap, like the unpaid workload of women, which says that women get 44% more requests to take on quote unquote unpaid work that don't actually contribute to their advancement. Like, who's planning the baby showers and the parties, and who's filling the printer cartridges and taking the notes in meetings? It's those sort of things. It's these additional workloads. And I talk a lot about how just likability biases really impact women at work. And so what I decided, it was the impetus to write this book, was like, I didn't see anybody else out there talking about the both and. I saw a lot of folks talking about all the systemic issues that needed to be fixed. And I saw a lot of books written about, well, here's all the ways that you need to be more confident. And I'm like, no, It's a both and. Yes, we need to talk about all the systemic issues that need to be fixed so that women can show up and be seen in more of those decision-making rooms, but we're not going to solve them overnight. Bummer. So given that this is not going to change overnight, here are some strategies and tools that you can use to show up and thrive inside of those systems. And oh, by the way, like we're going to focus on you showing up as you and not who your company tells you you need to be successful. And so I think that's really what the impetus was, is I just saw this opening and I just felt compelled to write it. Like I felt like I had no choice but not to write it. And so I actually hired a book coach, which was really helpful. And I wrote very badly at first.
In fact, the first draft of everything is supposed to be.
The first 10,000 words I sent to her didn't even make the book, if it makes anybody in here feel any better. And so the only way to actually get clarity and confidence on what you're going to be writing is to do the audacious thing that my book coach made me do, which was write. I hired her, and you know what she made me do? She made me write.
The Stephen Pressfield book is one of my favorites. It's a short audio book, but it's essentially put your ass where your heart wants to be.
Exactly.
And if you want to be a writer, it's in the chair. And it sucks. And to your point, the first draft is awful because you're kind of slogging through it and thinking nobody's going to read this crap. But it's kind of the first draft of a talk. You've got to get it out there to make it better. So kudos to you for it. What I really stood out about what you were sharing is there's so much either or. There's no and. Like, and we take this, you can take this any direction. Most political issues, like everything in the media is you're this or this versus, well, what is the combination of the, like there's ways to do both, but our society loves to compartmentalize everything it's either this way or it's this way. And I love how you approach that. Talk to me a little bit about the balance between, and this is definitely more something men struggle with, but the balance between where you see the confidence and almost the overconfidence, the arrogance. Because as you're building confidence, the last thing you want to do is give up that curiosity or let that ego take over, because then, to your point, if you already had things stacked against you as a woman in the workplace and you become overconfident, almost to the point of arrogance, it can work dramatically against you versus the confidence that allows you to show up. So talk to us about that growth and avoiding that tipping point.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect opportunity to share a story that got cut from the book. So this will be extra special. So I know. So in sales, and this is not going to shock you, I was doing pretty well. And so because I was doing pretty well, guess what happened? I got a little cocky. Okay. And so when this sales,
never heard of a sales professional getting cocky.
25, thought I just had this company by the tail. And so I wanted to be a sales trainer so bad. And so a job opened up. And so I applied for it. And I'm like, oh, I'm a shoo-in because I'm always at the top of the leaderboards. I did all this like research on how to be a good trainer. And so I went into the interview and told them everything I was going to change and, all this sort of stuff. And I remember, I will never forget, HR calls me. And I was like, oh, this is my offer. And she's like, we wanted to let you know that we've proceeded with other candidates. And I was like, oh. And when I found out who the other candidates were, they hired like operations people. And I'm like, and as a salesperson, like that's the ego, is you hired an operations person to be a sales trainer? Yeah. I remember I was so livid. My ego was so bruised. And so finally I got the courage to go to the hiring manager and ask her, get some feedback on why I wasn't hired. And I love her. 20 years later, she is one of my dearest friends, but she said to me, Kelli, do you know the difference between confidence and cockiness? And I remember tears came to my eyes. She was a new to me manager at this point. I didn't know her, but tears came to my eyes and I kind of swallowed them. I'm like, I think so. And she very lovingly, let's talk about managerial courage here. Very lovingly, yet very transparently explained that perhaps I wasn't as clear on the difference between confidence and cockiness as I thought. And some of the examples that she gave to me were, Kelli, like, are you open and aware of the people around you? Like, do you say hi to people in the hallway? They're like, frankly, you're a little intimidating to people because you don't tend to come across as, open or friendly, or people feel like they say hi to you and you don't acknowledge them. And there was and one of the things she said was, she's like, you came in your interview with so much self-assurance of everything you were going to change. And that leads me to my bottom line of all of this is, what is the difference between confidence and cockiness? And what I believe now is that cockiness is confidence without curiosity. Like curiosity is an essential element. Like I went into that interview lacking total curiosity. Like I didn't go in and like ask questions and tell me, well, how do you approach this? What has been your current process for designing, training, etc.? No, I went in and basically kind of told them all the stuff that kind of wasn't working well. And here was going to be my way. Total lack of curiosity. And so, yeah, curiosity is the key to avoiding cockiness, because when we're in those situations, you know, it's really interesting when we get really curious with people, when we're tempted to just tell people how to do a thing, you know, people feel seen, they feel understood, and then we can just be present with that person, you know, and it just creates this connection in this room, you know, that helps create more of a dialogue and exchange. And I think that's, you know, a more genuine form of confidence than showing up and telling people how much you know or all the things you're going to do.
One of the things I'm curious, because you've had a very successful career and we can all relate to making immature decisions in our 20s when experiencing success. But one of the things as we mature is being more intentional with either who we surround ourselves with or what our systems are to check that ego, right? It's very easy for one of us to walk off stage after crushing a keynote and think, pretty good, but that gets you into trouble before the next one. So how do you currently in life maintain that curiosity?
I think I'm a naturally curious person. However, one thing that, you know, related to the example you just gave is I always ask for feedback. I always ask for feedback. I ask for feedback every time I get off a presentation, every time, whether it's virtual or in person, every time I finish an engagement with a client, I say, please give me all the feedback, good, bad, and ugly. I always use it to go better. And one of the things that I actually use is instead of using the word feedback, I use the word advice. Everybody hates to give feedback, but you know what everybody loves to give? They love to give it some advice. I'm like, give me some advice. And that's been really, really helpful. I would say the other thing, and this is something I talk about a lot, I actually have a TED Talk coming out in the fall about this, is I'm really careful to surround myself with people who won't put me on a pedestal. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Early on in my corporate career, I put leaders on a pedestal all the time, thinking that just because they'd been around longer than me, they had more letters behind their name, they maybe were more charismatic than I was, that they must know best. And so because, you know, I had them on this pedestal, I believed everything they said, even if it was going against. It would help, like I would silence my ideas, silence my intuition. And so then I wouldn't speak up. But the pedestal actually is hurtful for two people. It's hurtful for people who put, like me, I put them on a pedestal, so I stay silent. My ideas go unheard. But it's actually really hurtful for the leader as well, because they don't get good feedback. This is how corporate scandals happen. This is how companies have toxic environments, is we're too scared to give them feedback. And so I think it's really important that I surround myself with people who like don't believe in my BS. Like that'll be like, Kelly, that was not your best. Kelly, I have to tell you that this was this thing. Like I really pursue people around me who will be honest with me about what's working and what's not working.
I love that. Well, and I think we need that, right? The best have to have those coaches and that honest. And I think what you said there as well, I want to preface for everybody is you're really intentional with who you go to seek that advice or feedback from. And I think it's not just everybody. Like I know when I first started my speaking career, I offended a couple of other speakers because they're like, hey, can I give you advice? And I was like, no. And it wasn't that I was like, no, I don't like you. But my coach at the time was like, you have to be so guarded, especially early on, because if the wrong thing gets in your ear, you're going to throw out the stuff you're actually good at. And so I was super guarded with it, except for like, hey, you and you, I trust to give me feedback. As I've gotten older, I've screened people of who I can seek feedback from. But to your point, like you always want to seek it from the client. And I laugh because like the audience, usually the people that want to tell you something in the audience, it's like the one or two people that didn't like the one thing you did. And most everybody else did. And if you throw out that, you ruin the next presentation. But seeking advice or feedback, and I love how you frame that, and being consistent with that. And I think every one of us can do that, whether we're managing a retail team and store of seeking feedback from who we report to, as well as our team of ways to better manage you, to, even just seeking feedback from your spouse of like, hey, where can I better check in with you this week? What advice would you give me on how I can better show up this month that I didn't last month? And that just takes intentionality. All of this kind of goes back to confidence doesn't happen accidentally. Like you have to build it intentionally. So let me ask you, as we're starting to wrap up today. I'm a man, right? Maybe I'm struggling with overconfidence, or maybe I've just had a bad run and I'm struggling with a lack of confidence. Does your book still fit for me?
Yeah, it is. Actually, men have read my book and they enjoy it. I've had CEOs of companies read my book because the tools are the tools are the tools. So whenever I talk with somebody who is maybe struggling with a lack of confidence, and I talk a lot in my book about, in my opening chapter, about kind of like my life's rock bottom moment. I call it my kitchen table moment. You'll have to read the book to hear it. But if somebody would have asked me in that moment, like, Kelli, well, what do you want? How could you get more confident? I'd be like, I don't know. I don't know anything. I made so many bad choices. But in that moment, and where I always start with folks, and this is, if you're listening, you can ask yourself this, is maybe right now you don't know what you want, but I bet you can tell me at least one thing you don't want. I bet you can tell me one thing in your life right now where you're carrying some resentment because you're said yes to something or you're stuck in something and it doesn't feel good. And that resentment is killing your confidence. And that's where I tell folks to start naming things that you don't want. Because secondly, that will help you start to identify your values. Values aren't just fuzzy marketing language. Values are those things that you stand for. Because if you don't know what you stand for, what are you going to settle for? And so when you can get some really clear indications about things that you value by just honestly looking at your resentments. Like, for instance, one of the reasons why I left the organization I was at is I was so resentful that we never had a learning budget. And I ran training and I'm like, oh, I value learning. I should go to a company that has a learning budget. It's like I was so angry because my values were being violated. So those are good places to start is, what do I know I don't want? What are my values? What do I stand for? What's important? What are non-negotiables that I have to have in my work and in my relationships in my life? And then I would say the third thing that you can do is really start to think about, what am I best at? Like, what is my unique talent? What have I been put on this earth to do? And am I even using it? Because, it's showing up and using those gifts and talents every day in alignment with your values. Like, those are the things that build confidence. I also have a lot of folks that say, well, you know what? I just don't feel confident yet to get up and do that thing. And fair enough. Guess what? I didn't feel confident enough to write a book, to launch a book. I never feel confident enough to get up on stage and speak, even though I've been doing it for 20 years. But here's the thing. It's the actions of confidence that come first. It's the feelings that come second. So I argue with folks that confidence is a side effect of taking action. And so what discomfort are you willing to accommodate to move closer to the type of things you want to do so that you can feel the effects of confidence after the fact?
I love that. And it's the idea that motivation comes after action. Like just waiting on it's not going to show up. No different than the old Alex Hormozy quote that I just love is confidence is having that undeniable stack of evidence. And the only way you accumulate that evidence is the action without feeling it. And so I love how you frame that. Kelli, where is the best place for listeners to connect with you, learn more, and maybe pick up a copy of your book?
Yeah, well, my book is anywhere books are sold, but folks love the Amazon, and I do read my own book, so it is on Audible. So if you are an Audible listener, you can go grab it on Audible. You can come to my website. I'm KelliRaeThompson.com, Kelli with an I, R-A-E. And I mostly hang out on LinkedIn, so that would be a great place to find me, but I dabble a little bit on Instagram as well. So you can come find me there and let me know what resonated with you.
We've got everything linked in the show notes. Kelli, as we wrap up, we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, which means I bet you have a margarita in your future planned based on your website. But the big question I have is, are you going to be at opening night of Twisters?
That's tonight? How did I not know?
No, it's next week. It's next week.
Oh, it's next week? Okay, so
I think it's next week.
I should know this. You know why? Because
I saw on your website.
I know, because ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to be a meteorologist. I was a meteorology major originally in college, and I'm a certified storm spotter. And you think that I would know that movie is coming out, but let me be clear that I've watched the original, and I went to the Universal Studios Resort, and so I've experienced the Twister, but I've actually seen one come down.
Wow.
I'll get on it.
Yeah, no, it comes out next Friday as we're recording this on the 12th. It comes out on the 19th. We've laughed. So my wife grew up in Oklahoma, and she's like, it's too close to home for me. And I was like, I'll be there opening night.
Oh, yeah.
Sign me up. And when I saw on your website prepping for today that, similar to me, you're a margarita lover, but that you were a storm spotter. And I was like, I bet she's going to be there for Twisters.
Yes, I will watch it. I will watch it for sure.
Love it.
1,000%.
Thank you so much for coming on the show this week.
Thanks for having me.